is this being used only in the field of health?
So the work we've done to date has focused within health. The review that my colleague Fiona Campbell did only looked at examples that were linked to health across the health and social care divide, I guess. So health and the family of health, if we put it that far. The general methods of QES are being adopted in a lot of sectors. So, for example, in education, and they are feeling the pressure to deliver answers quickly. But I personally have not been involved in surveying it. So it has application outside health, but the guidance is based from activity within health.
So there was one question, let me go up here, by Theodorus, who was asking, well, would you recommend this method to be applied upon primary data derived by a focus group process or in-depth interview process conducted with a specific number of institutional stakeholders acting on the wider field of healthcare?
Very good question. Thanks, Isolde. Yeah, we have always, as a methods group, steered clear of this sort of application because we see this as a different process. This is more secondary analysis of qualitative data. We have embraced the term qualitative evidence synthesis because we think the processes can be common to both. But in terms of the guidance, this is specifically about the use within the context of literature reviews. So no, a secondary qualitative data analysis is quite a different topic, although some of these suggestions may well prove useful under rapid constraints.
Thank you. Then we have a question from Cara. What would you say are the stages of the review in which you recommend knowledge users to be involved in rapid QES? So are there certain stages in which you choose to involve them in rapid versus usual longer QES?
Yeah, I think we particularly focused on the scoping and the identification of the primary perspectives and the primary review question. Because that getting that right means that any efficiencies that we do in order to achieve that later on are worthwhile, are beneficial. We think that there may be a role in relation to interim findings. So obviously, we need to be aware that, for example, lay members of the community won't necessarily have protected time as researchers to look through reports and findings, but so to have some sort of interim sharing where we can do some sense checking before we get into presenting and writing up the reports, those seem particularly critical. But essentially, the more time you have, the more opportunities you should make for this.
Thank you. Then we have a few comments. Thank you for including the role of experienced information specialists. There's a question from Mustafa. Would you also support non-dual data extraction for non-rapid reviews?
This is a difficult one. The evidence that we have is mainly based on quantitative reviews, and it's very easy to demonstrate with quantitative reviews because essentially numbers are either right or wrong, they're either in the right position or not. There is little empirical evidence about the value of dual data extraction. If I turn the question on its head, which is to slightly sidestep it, if you've got the ability to use more than one person at any stage of the review, then its value would come in terms of the analysis and interpretation, where you would benefit from multiple perspectives introducing diversity rather than the quantitative model, which is about achieving consensus. So I think if we think about reviews, qualitative reviews, as being to try and unearth difference and context, then it's better to use multiple people in the analysis rather than in the data extraction.
Okay, another question from Thomas. You mentioned there's empirical evidence to suggest that Scopus is a good starting point for qualitative research. Is there empirical evidence to suggest the same for quantitative research?
There is, yes. I guess one of the difficulties is how to design that sort of research, because very often it's done through analyses of what people have actually found and what proportion is found through different routes, which is obviously not saying what could be found, which is the more important and interesting question. But yes, I mean, in the Cochrane Handbook on Information Retrieval, sorry, there's not a whole handbook on it, but the chapter on information retrieval in the main Cochrane Handbook, there will be studies cited there on issues of database coverage. What I thought was interesting with our own recommendations is this trade-off between coverage with Scopus and functionality with PubMed, and that needs to be a locally managed decision.
Okay, and then we have another one from Mitri. He's doing a qualitative scoping review, not a QS, of using the site. This is a bit off topic, using the citation chaining as primary search strategy without database searching. I wonder, what is your view with this search strategy?
There's very limited evidence for solely doing this, and our guidance is very much on using it as a complementary technique. I don't think that anyone would recommend a strategy that was entirely citation based. With Chris Cooper from Exeter, I've been involved in a paper that looked at the sizable contribution that citation chasing can make. But it seems to me that you almost need some sort of database searching to be evaluating at the time how well the citation strategy is doing. So it will always be complementary. I prefer to think of it as complementary rather than the supplementary. It's not necessarily less important, but the two do contribute different things.
Then we have a follow-up comment from Mustafa about the dual screening. He said, I'm concerned that without dual and independent approach in doing reviews, reliability and replicability may be affected.
Yeah, I think we're all concerned about that. That's why we're suggesting that any quality assurance targets where your area of concern is. As this guidance and the other guidance is coming out under the banner of Cochrane, we're certainly not suggesting that one is better than two. We're not suggesting that one is sufficient. We're saying that you should see where the area of risk is and target that. So if that involves, for example, just having a second person checking the extraction of verbatim extracts, for example, against a framework, then that would be a good use, as opposed to the duplication and possible redundancy of having two people doing exactly the same thing and perhaps 95% of what they're doing being identical.
Then we have a question from Daniela. I came across the snowballing approach within systematic reviews in general. I'm still a newbie in supporting systematic reviews as a librarian. Could you explore on that?
Yeah, I think the big question with snowballing is similar to snowballing when we do it with populations rather than studies, which is how many iterations do you need to do? So you start off with an initial set, perhaps of 10, that might lead to 100. That then, if you're going to then be snowballing from the 100, do you do the whole 100 and then end up with thousands? And so how many rounds do you do? I think the other thing is that what's an acceptable hit rate for the use of citations and snowballing? We tend to find that somewhere between 2 and 4 possible eligible records per 100 records is regarded as acceptable in the context of subject searching. Is that the same for citation searching? Or should we be imposing some other benchmark? So as I said in my presentation, I think there is a really ripe field for some empirical work to cover many of these issues.
Okay, do we have any other questions? There's one. From Dia. Hi, can you say something about the grade circle? When is it used?
Right. So grade circle is specifically used when you're making recommendations as a result of the review. So, for example, there's a very high profile review on vaccine hesitancy, people's attitudes to vaccines. And so when you go that extra mile, if you like, of making recommendations that decision makers would then implement, then you need some way of, if you like, rating or ranking your statements according to the amount of certainty associated with them. And so while a lot of reviews will only go as far as the analysis and interpretation, a certain category, particularly for decision makers like HTA and Cochrane, have to go that extra step, which is analogous to the grade system, which is used for quantitative. We've developed a sensitive method called grade circle for qualitative research.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one last question from Javiera. When you suggest reusing the findings and grade circle assessments, this would be in the context of searching for and including previous QES as in an overview of QES? Or is there any process to easily identify these findings assessments?
Yeah, I mean, this is future-proofing the guidance, because obviously grade circle is, although increasingly used, is not ubiquitous. So we don't always have the choice of being able to use existing grade circle assessments. But yes, that would be in using reviews. Whether we're using those reviews as a review or as a source of multiple findings will depend on our review question. But in either case, having some judgment by the authors on the amount of certainty associated with their findings can inform our own response.